You're all set, Ramon?
Are we on?
Yes, we are on, welcoming our guests.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Ramon. I'm the organizer for the Junction Coalition. So we're glad that you have joined us this evening. And this is the Junction Community Water Council. And so we have decided that we wanted to invite you all to be part of a presentation and also a discussion about how do we move forward in terms of economic or environmental justice and the cost of our water. This is something that the community has been working on for over a year now. And so now we're ready to power up our emphasis on making sure that everyone has clean, safe, affordable, and recreational water. And so this year, 2021, is the year to do that, to really kick it off. Somebody once mentioned the honeymoon is over. And so now we're going to move forward with this. We have a great panel that's going to be coming on here shortly. I'd like to let you know that Maria is going to start off the panel discussion, and that will be talking about what is the issue. And then we'll have Mark Riley come on. He will give a brief announcement. And then we'll have Alexis Smith, who will talk about how does Freshwater Future support the community. And then we'll, of course, have Marky Miller, who will talk about the role of direct democracy and the rights of nature. And then following Marky will be Mike Ferner, who will talk about how do we organize advocacy and public action, which is really where we lift everything up and move it forward. And of course, then at the end, we're going to have, but not least, we'll have Christy Meyer, who will be with Freshwater Future and talk about what legislation is supporting our work. And so we've got a lot of really important information to share with you, and we've got some action plans and thoughts that we want to share with you. And so we really want to get this going. And I want to thank Alicia and Alexis and Kayla for really helping put this seminar together. It's a lot of work, but boy, they've just done a real slam dunk job. So I think you're going to really enjoy and appreciate what we have to share with you. So at this point, I would like to introduce Maria and get her started.
Okay, is my screen show? Oopsie, yeah, is my screen showing?
Yes,
Does everyone sees the pea soup?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, all righty. Yeah, welcome to all of you. You're all familiar with this picture. Remember our water crisis at the beginning of August of 2014, and the problem has not gone away. And so we need to recruit all of you to help us, with this problem. Okay, these are our sponsors: the Toledo Water Council and the Junction Coalition. The Junction Coalition has been involved for a long time with the clean water, safe water. And then when we got news that Toledo was going to be changing its payment structure for water, the Junction Coalition got all kinds of stakeholders together around the table to talk about how can we make affordable water how can we make water affordable for all of our folks. And so the seminar is mainly on justice issues and your involvement in those justice issues. However, my portion, I'm calling cows and the cost of our water. Although cows aren't the only animals involved, this is something that you can latch onto and remember. What do cows and other animals have to do with the picture that you're seeing here? That what we call the Pea Soup Factor. Now, you remember when the Junction Coalition first started gathering folks and giving presentations, you learned that that justice, various aspects of justice, are the pillars on which the Junction Coalition is built, and how we are trying to create community, a just and peaceful community for all of us. And the problem is a basic problem, because water is so important in our lives. Why are harmful algal blooms a detriment to our community? How do they harm us? And really the entire shoreline of Lake Erie and any other place where harmful algal blooms form. So, because we're a community working for economic justice, we have to remember that harmful algal blooms hurt the economy of Ohio. During the summer, when the harmful algal blooms appear, Ohio loses millions of dollars along its shoreline. And what company or what business or what family will move to this part of Ohio if a good part of the year, a good part of the summer, the water isn't available for recreational use? So we're working on economic justice issues. Because the Pea Soup Factor, because the toxic algal blooms affect our community life. This is a social justice issue, but mainly this is an environmental justice issue. And I'll explain a little bit more about what cows have to do with it. Basically, what we're experiencing from our government, both the state government and the federal government, is the lack of oversight and enforcement of clean water legislation. And that's the topic that Christy will address. The EPA was founded in the early 1970s to protect us from various environmental hazards. And then the Clean Water Act was enacted in 1972, so that's quite a bit of time ago, in order to make our water fishable, swimmable, and drinkable. And we have, because that is not being done, we have a right to ask, is our water safe? And we know that it's not, because millions of gallons of animal manure enter Lake Erie, from which Toledo draws its water, cleans it up, and then sends it to our homes. The more pollution, the greater the expense of cleaning our water. And of course, that's the price that we pay. The more pollution, the more expensive our water will become. And it's neighborhoods like the Junction. The research shows throughout the United States, throughout the world, communities of color, low-income neighborhoods, people living in poverty bear the greatest burden of this kind of pollution, any kind of water, any kind of water pollution. So remember this picture, what I've called the Pea Soup Factor. Now, Detroit, the city of Detroit, you all know that Detroit is very, very large, used to send us a large plume of sewage, but Detroit's sewage treatment plant has been totally rebuilt. It's brand new, and so we can't blame Detroit for the problem. And here's the city of Toledo. The Toledo Waterways initiative was a decade-long project that separated storm sewers from sanitary sewers. So the Toledo Waterways initiative, sanitary sewers, our sewage no longer overflows into the stormwater sewers when there's a big rain event. So the urban communities may be a small part of the problem, but there is a larger problem upstream, okay? And that problem is the big animal farms, not family farms, but the big animal farms that don't control and manage their manure. And Mike is going to give us some of those numbers and talk a little bit more about this problem, because the advocates for a clean Lake Erie have taken this on as their major issue. So the explosion of unregulated factory farms in the Maumee River watershed is what fuels Lake Erie's toxic blooms. Manure contains phosphates, and the phosphates flow down the Maumee River watershed into Lake Erie and feed the algae that are in Lake Erie. Now, by factory farms, we mean farms like this. And you, if those of you who are familiar with Google, go to Google Images and get yourself other photographs of factory farms. Chickens by the thousands, tightly packed together. Hogs by the thousands, tightly packed together. And cattle, both meat cattle and milk cattle being tightly packed together. Now, we eat meat, we have to drink milk. And so, we're not, we don't want to eliminate these factory farms, or we don't want to eliminate animals from our ecosystem, but we need to have them regulated. This is a hog farm in west of us in Fulton County. And when the buildings are cleaned, all of the manure that the hogs have produced is dumped into a lagoon like this. And then in the spring, when we have a lot of rain, guess what happens to the lagoon? It overflows into the creeks and streams and ditches that feed the rivers in our watershed, and which feed the Maumee River, which then takes that manure directly into Lake Erie. So it's raw sewage, raw animal sewage being dumped into Lake Erie and affecting our water. Okay, these are two pictures of the Maumee River watershed. You'll see that it goes up into Michigan because the St. Joseph River in Michigan is part of the Maumee River watershed. And here is the St. Mary's River watershed. The St. Mary's River and the St. Joseph River come together in Fort Wayne to form the Maumee River. Okay, we'll see, okay, right here. And then here is the Maumee River carrying some fertilizer, crop fertilizer, but a lot of animal manure to Toledo. Okay, now these were, I think, yeah, Mike sent me these maps. These were the concentrated animal feeding operations, or CAFOs, in 2005. And here you see their increase, all of the red dots added added lately within the past decade. Let's see, the size of the circle, okay, the size of the circle is the amount of manure that all of these farms produce. The yellow ones are, I can't see the legend. The yellow ones are the dairy cattle. These two big circles are major chicken operations. So remember, it's not just cows, it's hogs and chickens as well. And so this is the result. Here is, at the bottom is the Maumee River coming into Toledo, and this huge sewage, this huge plume entering our, entering our river, entering our Western Lake Erie Basin. Now, this is a photo from the Blade in 2014. This is a photo of the, from the Blade in 2014. This is not a smoothie. This is our drinking water. And all of this has to be cleaned out of our drinking water. We will not have peace unless we have clean water. Our environmental, social, economic needs need to be met for us to be a community of peace, because water is life, can't live without it, and we want our lake to be swimmable, fishable, drinkable, okay? And water is a basic human right, okay? And so we want our water to look like this. The Water Council has been working hard to keep our water affordable, and we have to work just as hard to keep our water clean. And so during the rest of the presentation, you'll be learning about what we as individuals and as a total community can do. And we will be deciding what we will do. Alrighty.
Wonderful. Thank you, sister.
Take it away.
Excellent. Very powerful presentation, Maria, and very powerful images. And it's just striking how, this, is still happening 2021 when we've known for so long that these problems have existed. And, every time I just got my water bill yesterday, so it just makes me sometimes feel like I'm paying my water bill to subsidize our water being polluted like that, and we have to pay for it. It just doesn't feel right, and I'm sure it's not. Thank you. At this point, I understand that our mayor, Kapsakevich, may be on, and if you are, we thank you and appreciate you being on, and look forward to any comments, support towards the end of the presentation. So I appreciate that. And next, I would like to bring on Mark Riley with the City of Toledo, and he's going to do a brief announcement. So, Mr. Riley, if you'd like to take that on.
Yes, that was a tough act to follow. Hi, I'm Riley. I'm with the City of Toledo, Department of Public Utilities. I'm the administrator for our water distribution division. I'm responsible for the field operations that will be the lead for our lead replacement program. With our lead replacement program, we have partnered with Freshwater Future, Blue Conduit, the Lucas County Health Department, University of Toledo, and of course with the Junction Coalition. I'm going to do a briefly go over our program that we're going to be starting this year. Unfortunately, I will not be part of the question and answer session at the end. I have a prior commitment, but I'll go ahead and get started. What we're doing with our lead program is our goal is to use data-driven approach to reduce the lead exposure for the most vulnerable communities in Toledo. How we're going to do that is with a proactive model where we identify the targeted areas, but most importantly, we give a targeted education to the community groups. We will have a water filter distribution once the program gets started, public communication related to lead in the water, and our lead service lab program, replacement program, we're going to be prioritizing where we start and the communities that are most infected that we will be. So we can go to the next slide, please. Toledo's long-term commitment to replacing its lead service lines is a 20-year program that systematically will replace all the service lines in Toledo. So I just want everyone to know we do not have lead in our lines. Our goal is to replace the old lead lines that a lot of our homes have throughout the city of Toledo and parts of Lucas County. This is a $2 million per year replacement program. It's to eliminate the continuous lead that possibly happens from the buildup of having lead lines for so long. This project will enable better targeting of outreach, education, and replacement to better protect our residents. So what we want to do is really educate our residents on the importance of this program. Many cities don't have an effective inventory of total lead service lines. Fortunately, we do have a good inventory of our lines and what's from service lines, from copper lines to galvanized pipe. So we are fortunate that we do have some reliable data, unlike other cities that don't have a lot of reliable and outdated and missing data. You go to the next slide, please. With Blue Conduit, partnering with them, they are developing a model for us to use so that we can be smarter and ensure that we're excavating pipes that most likely need replacement. With their help, we will be able to start our program and not just be digging and looking, but identifying places where we really need to dig at, where there's lead pipes that we know of. And Blue Conda has put together this model where they'll have a recommended inspections place, then prioritize where we should be starting, and then we go into our replacement program. So they're going to use the model of our existing data in part of a phase 1 where we do our inspection. Phase 2 and 3, we'll do our replacement. And then as the program develops, we'll be able to identify and continue this process over the next few years. When we start our phase 1, most importantly, we want to meet with the project stakeholders to align on the project and the process. Assemble data from the city, Lucas County, Health Department, and other available data. We plan on meeting with the public health experts on the lead exposure reduction and generate a list of recommended homes for inspection and develop initial estimates on what the process is. We can go to the next one, please. We're going to be gathering data to recommend inspection sites. We're going to develop training and educational materials for our communities. We're going to run a predictive model of data for inspections. We're going to organize data at home, block watches, and neighborhoods, and meet with the city to integrate our decision-making on what areas we will be working in to do our lead line service replacement. Next slide, please. Again, when our phase 3, again, this is going to be a continuous communication with our community groups. We're going to continue to create and distribute educational material to our targeted areas. And most importantly, we just information. I know my time is up, and hopefully, I ran through that quick, but hopefully we'll have time where we can come back and do a longer presentation to just educate the community on our lead service line program. So thanks for having me.
All right, Mark, thank you very much for that important information. I know that the Freshwater Future was very instrumental in helping to bring a blue conduit to the attention of the city and to the Department of Public Utilities. And, you know, it's going to be a cost-saving entity for this large project. So it was a partnership that, you know, that we believe that, you know, was very helpful in moving things forward in a very cost-efficient way. So thank you very much, Mr. Riley.
Thank you all.
You got it, brother. And so we want to keep moving. This is all really just so important and critical for moving forward, even after this webinar. The dialogue and the work is going to continue. And so we'll be staying in touch with you all, and vice versa. We want you to stay in touch with us so we can move this forward. Next, we're going to have Alexis Smith, and she's going to be talking about how does Freshwater Future support community. So Alexis, you're on.
Thanks, Ramon. Thanks, Coalition, Toledo Community Water Council, the city of Toledo, and the mayor for having us. And you know, I'm excited to talk more about the relationship that the Toledo Community Water Council and Freshwater Future has built with the city. But before we get to that, I want to just briefly go over, you know, who is Freshwater Future. My name is Alexis Smith. I'm the Community Programming and Technical Associate with Freshwater Future. Freshwater Future is a binational organization that works in the 8 Great Lakes states and the province of Ontario. We work to protect and ensure that the healthy future of the Great Lakes region, as well as supporting communities to pretty much protect the waters in their own backyard. And that can look like ensuring that residents get their water tested for lead or PFAS contamination, that can mean facilitating congressional visits where we take people who don't typically get an opportunity to talk to their decision makers, can talk to those decision makers directly. We don't always have to speak for, people. They can speak for themselves, and they know their story better than most. And so when we talk about the education on environmental justice issues, that can be from fracking to the pollution of our lakes, which can include lead, PFAS, harmful algal blooms, invasive species. Those are all things that Freshwater Future is focusing on throughout, from New York to Wisconsin, Minnesota. We're working with communities that are on the ground doing this work and know these issues. We refer often, and we create tools that help communities learn about things like the lead and copper rule. Is your city in compliance with that lead and copper rule? Replacing their lead pipes and making sure that our communities, and not just vulnerable communities, but all the communities with low socioeconomic are not left behind when it comes to improving our infrastructure. Freshwater Future also leverages our platforms to communicate the needs and the impact on community to local, state, and federal legislators and decision makers. Oftentimes, they say that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And a lot of times our community people who live in Junction, people who live in the rural communities are on the menu, and they're not asked what they would like to see happen. They're not asked what is the impact of, harmful algal blooms coming downstream and impacting your water. What is the impact of, rising water rates, especially on top of this pandemic. And so in doing that and ensuring that, we educate our communities, it gives them back the water democracy that we have not been privy to before. Knowing that you have a hand in what happens to you, and knowing that there are tools that you can use and partners that you can come to for assistance, helps build that power. So a few of these images, you will see that, our education reaches not just in, the older folks, but we're also trying to engage young people so that this work, when the Ramones and the Mike Furners and everybody are, often retiring, we have young people coming up doing this work and continuing to be the voice of community. And so supporting frontline action means supporting the Toledo Community Water Council. Junction Coalition help sponsor the Water Council. And in doing that, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that amazing Water Council has been able to accomplish, we're building water democracy. As far as Freshwater Future goes, we help with capacity building. We work in Flint when they face their crisis and still in the middle of their crisis. We've been assisting Detroit with their mass water shutoffs, and we've been assisting Toledo in trying to, in supporting them and wanting moratoriums and restoring people's water services. We've been supporting them in making sure that their voices are heard when they talk about, wanting to having very high astronomical water bills. Freshwater Future also offers consulting on technology, what it takes to be a 501c3, making sure that you're in compliance to being a 501c3, even to giving some strategy and advice on policy. What policies are impacting our life, and how can we either uplift policy that is good policy and fight against policy that is detrimental. And so doing that with facilitating congressional visits. And so the Toledo Community Water Council, some of the wins that they've been able to accomplish, and I've been happy to partner and witness, is they advocated for a debt forgiveness program. What they realized is that, during this, not even just during the pandemic, but before the pandemic and especially now, people couldn't afford, the rising water rates, which, has something to do with the upstream harmful algal bloom contamination, but also has a lot to do with the aging infrastructure, has a lot to do with decisions being made about our water that you know, did not have much public input. And so you know, from the rate structure changing, it caused a lot of people to be impacted. And the Toledo residents said they wanted to be a part of decision making. They didn't just want people to make decisions for them and not talk to them. And so Freshwater Future said, that's what we do, and we're going to help you in that messaging. Um, the Toledo Water Council pushed for no partial lead line replacements because with talking with Freshwater Future, they learned that partial lead line replacements makes it more likely for lead to enter into our waterways. When you disrupt that, anytime you disrupt that connection, and you don't continue it all the way through the entire service line, you increase the chances of having lead in your water. And so taking that knowledge from, you know, their partners like Freshwater Future, the Toledo Water Council went to the city and said, we can't do partial, we shouldn't be doing partial lead line replacements anymore. They also really encouraged the city to place a moratorium in place, and not only place that moratorium, but restore the services to people who are going to be living without water, especially during a pandemic. They've been advocating for equitable means of replacing service lines, even though that, you know, there's loans and things available for people to replace their lines. We know that a lot of these families that are living on a fixed income still can't afford to replace their lines. And what are they left to do? Just drink this water, or use a filter, you know, and potentially keep their families at risk. They shouldn't be left to only those devices. And so we've helped them advocate for an equitable means by bringing Blue Conduit to the table, and making sure that these are residents with not representing any organization or anything, coming together and telling us what they want to see, and we stand behind them 100%. And lastly, something that was one of our main priorities was urging the city to conduct a water affordability study. When canvassing the neighborhood and finding out there were people with families and young children who are having their water cut off, or were struggling, or, you know, robbing Peter to pay Paul just so they can keep their water on, it became clear, and it's going to be a fact that not only impacts Toledo, but it's going to impact the entire country, that water is increasingly becoming more and more unaffordable. And so they pushed, you know, their public utilities to really consider and rightfully and were able to get a water affordability study. So looking into the future, Freshwater Future will continue to support the Water Council in its capacity building, and we're also going to be pushing back on the HAB contamination. They're going to be asking the city to join us in that fight. So that's all the time I have. So thank you. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thank you, Ramon.
You got it, Alexis. Really excellent information. And I know there's much more to report, but this won't be the last webinar, because we're going to be doing a lot of work this year to raise up this issue and really get some things accomplished for 2021. At this time, I'd like to welcome and thank Senator Fetter for being on. We appreciate your commitment and your interest in the work that we're doing, and how we're going to push forward to really get some results and get some some really good supportive services that we need, and certainly look at upstream and how we're going to better address that. So thank you, Senator Fetter, for being on. And Alexis, I heard you say that I was going to be retiring. I'm not going to be retiring. I don't know what that was about. But you're right. But you're right. We got to bring in all the young bloods. You know, hopefully there's some on here that are going to be helping us move this forward and handing off, you know, the knowledge, and so that they can, pick it up and move it, and then we can, support them. So next, I'd like to bring on Marky Miller. And she is going to be talking about the role of direct democracy and the rights of nature. And so, Marky, you got it.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Ramon. And thank you for including me in this dialogue and for everybody who's taken time out of their week to be here. Appreciate it. My name is Marky Miller. I'm a volunteer organizer with Toledoans for Safe Water, just a grassroots group behind the Lake Erie Bill of Rights, or LEBOR. And I want to share the story of LEBOR with a focus on two things. First is getting us to consider the source of the issues on a deeper level. And second is how we take that information to better inform our participation in a more meaningful way. And as always, we start with the Pseudo-Water Crisis. And of course, these stories of waterless communities are really endless once you start looking for them. Puerto Rico still suffering after the hurricane, made worse by drought. The Navajo Nation, probably 40% without running water. Our neighbors in Flint, Michigan. But unfortunately, it's really not until it becomes a lived and shared experience that you fully understand the severity of that reality. And as we've mentioned here, many people in our own community, for other reasons, still struggling to have access to clean, safe water. So of course, these pictures take us back to August of 2014, where 500,000 members of our community woke up to a waterless world, confronted with a do not touch, do not drink, do not boil order, all due to this harmful bloom of blue-green algae or cyanobacteria. And although our crisis only lasted 3 days, it quickly became apparent that this issue had been ongoing for years. And the narrative that emerged focused on how this toxic bloom happened to drift into our intake well. In my mind, really downplaying the seriousness of the issue. And one official from our water treatment facility even remarked, well, sorry, but we had a situation, not a crisis. Well, it's turned into one expensive situation. And it's that perspective that Toledoans for Safe Water wanted to confront. We didn't want to be prepared for the next crisis or situation as each summer approached, or rely on early warning systems to let us know when we should avoid the water. We wanted to heal the problem at the source, reducing the burden on the community and improving the overall health of Lake Erie. And unfortunately, what we run into locally is that the source of the problem sort of begins with the current condition of Lake Erie. And that limits the local response to how can we treat the water and therefore manage the problem. And that stops short of dealing with the harm and really keeps the burden on the people here in the community. So people got together and they dug a little deeper. Now, we can start looking at really specific harm. And in our case, as was mentioned in the first presentation, sources of nutrient pollution from large-scale industrialized animal factories. The quantity of these operations and the vast amounts of manure produced only amplify the nutrient impact on Lake Erie and the Western Lake Erie Basin in particular, especially with regard to dissolved phosphorus and the drainage tile system used widely in this watershed. And I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I won't be going into a lot of detail on this issue specifically. Save that for later, and always happy to talk about it, talk about manure if anyone's up for it. It's important to understand and challenge harms at this level. But instead of stopping here, we want to understand the system that perpetuates this type of agriculture, and which we now understand as a legalized harm. We know the negative impacts of these operations, so why are they allowed to continue, especially when there's so much public outcry for them to end? And ultimately, it's because we're working in a fixed system. The problem is that communities are unable to say no to harmful projects and permits. It doesn't matter what the harm is. We end up having no voice. Things are working just fine for the corporate actors who create and perpetuate the barriers that we face in trying to get direct democracy and local decision-making power. When we focus on these single issues alone, we fail to create the deep structural changes we need in order to create just, sustainable, and fair communities. And this is where movement building towards local self-determination and rights of nature really comes in. We make this realization that after 5 decades of environmental laws, they're no longer protecting communities and nature. Our current legal system is designed to allow, regulate, and permit harmful practices despite the potential or even known consequences. And ultimately, our efforts may cause delay, but rarely do we get to halt the projects in the long term. And why? Because corporations have more rights than communities. And ultimately, things like animal factories, fracking, pipelines, incinerators, fracking brine de-icer spread on the roads, and other threats are forced on us by corporate influence and agreed to by our government. So what do we do about it? We get organized. We practice direct democracy as much as possible. We write the laws that reflect our values, and we come together to create the community we want to live in. And once you identify these barriers, that's when you have to make an active decision to confront and challenge them directly. And that's what the people here did with the Lake Erie Bill of Rights. LEBOR was a charter amendment that recognized the legal rights of Lake Erie to exist, flourish, and thrive by advancing the rights of nature. And rights of nature is an emerging legal framework rooted in indigenous knowledge that recognizes the inalienable rights of natural systems. It also acts as a direct challenge to the idea of nature as property, an idea that's been embedded in our environmental regulations and policies for far too long. LEBOR also gave legal standing to Lake Erie, with Toledoans as her trustees and guardians. Currently, we have to wait for the harm to happen before we can intervene. And even then, if it's not too late, we're often limited to work within the agency that issued the permit to allow the harm to happen in the first place. With LEBOR, we could proactively object to harms and work outside of the existing regulatory framework. Our timeline is a bit long, so I won't go through everything that we did to put it on the ballot, but a small group of us got organized, helped draft the law with the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, and we took to the streets to collect the required number of signatures to place the issue on the ballot before the voters. But of course, we were met with a few challenges along the way. And initially, we were kept off the ballot by the Board of Elections. And at that point, from that point on, the amount of corporate and outsider opposition to this very local initiative was quite overwhelming. And I'll give a few examples of that. When we were kept off the ballot, we took the Board of Elections to the Ohio Supreme Court to challenge that decision. And this list is just the corporate lobbyist group filed a amicus brief in support of keeping us off the ballot. So that should really show you something about the power and the influence that they have in our courts and even in our local democracy. And despite losing that case, we did eventually earn our way onto a special election ballot that had been planned already for February of 2019. But even placement on that ballot was challenged by one resident, Josh Abernathy, who was represented by a law firm out of Columbus, well known for representing oil and gas within the state. 2 weeks before our election, the opposition ads started to run. And this included 4 full-color mailers, 2 radio ads that ran on at least 9 stations locally, probably every half hour. And the group behind the ads called themselves the Toledo Jobs and Growth Coalition and had only existed for about a week when they came into the scene. And they sat back and called us meddlers, outsiders, and extremists for wanting to amend our own charter. But ultimately, the ads really didn't work. And I like to point this out too. This is a picture from the opposition. This is not something that we put together about the opposition. They were trying to say that this is what we were doing. Our grassroots team raised about $6,000 for our entire campaign, and the money was donated by community members who wanted to show support. The opposition spent $300,000 on a 2-week campaign and turned out to be fully funded by BP out of Houston, Texas. But none of that mattered in the end. On election day, we won with 62% of the vote in our favor, becoming the first law on United States settler colonial land to recognize the rights of a specific ecosystem. And while our persistence in getting on the ballot is often seen as unruly or disobedient, the corporate state was equally persistent in keeping us from victory. Hours after the election results came in, a corporate entity sued the city of Toledo for allowing its citizens to amend their local charter with such anti-corporate language. To be clear, the city of Toledo was sued by Dravis Farms LLC, not Mark Dravis, but his LLC. So essentially a piece of paper. And the state of Ohio joined the lawsuit on the side of the polluter. And in the meantime, Toledoans for Safe Water and organizing members from the community were denied their motion to intervene in that case. Of course, while awaiting a decision in that case, the state also illegitimately passed an anti-rights of nature provision tucked inside the state budget bill. It was added after the deadline, and the language was written by the Ohio Chamber of Commerce.
1 minute.
After a year of legal arguments, a federal judge made his decision to overturn Billboard, and his verdict found that our local law had caused harm to the state of Ohio, but at least on paper. And while that's really disappointing, it's also really validating to know that we were a legitimate threat, that our effort had teeth. And that was evident enough by the powerful opposition we had to Billboard. It was really solidified by the judge's ruling. And honestly, causing that harm to the state permitting process was kind of the point. So while it is frustrating, we see this not as a loss, but a victory, because we didn't lose. We engaged in democracy at the local level. We made our concerns known. We took steps to empower people to come up with local solutions to local needs. Laws don't change unless the culture changes, and the culture doesn't move until we do. So we personified Lake Erie once before, and we need to do that again, not just with her, but with our advocacy. We might not be seeing sweeping success in the courts right now, but we're planting seeds. We can't afford any more compromises, and although change is scary and climate chaos is intensifying, we can't ignore the pain and suffering of Lake Erie for much longer, because eventually it becomes our own.
Wonderful. Hi.
Wow. Marky, that was amazing work, and it still is amazing work because it's still in the minds of a lot of folks. And I know that a lot of folks, you know, like this past summer, I seen a lot of folks from the city who would go out to the beaches, you know, along Lake Erie, and you know, couldn't go in the water, you know. It was this pea soup. It was green, and I would go out there and look at it, and I would look down the beach, hundreds of people, and not one person in that water, and it's right here in our backyard. And it's just amazing how that, you know, that this is being supported by that list that you had shown earlier. And that list, it seems like those are folks that are right here in our own backyard, and shame on them, you know, for wanting clean, you know, drinkable, usable, recreational water for all citizens. And, you know, so I appreciate, you know, your work and your continued work that you're doing. And you're absolutely right. 2021 is going to be a year where we're going to raise this up, and we're going to make some things happen, because we have to. Can't do another year, another summer without being able to enjoy the water and you know, participate in democracy, and being able to say that this is not right and we need to change it, and that's what we're going to do. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, thank you.
And I do want to move on and recognize Teresa Gaddis, the City Council representative. She's been a great ally with the work that we've been doing. That was spoken earlier with that Alexis talked about in terms of getting some things done at the City Council level. So Teresa Gaddis, if you're still on, we thank you very much and appreciate you being on with us. Next, I'd like to bring on Mike Ferner, and he is going to be talking about how do we organize advocacy and public action. And so this is something where we've drilled down and use this as part of the platform and guide for us for this coming year. And so we're really looking forward to this presentation, and then follow that up with Christy. So Mike, you're on, brother.
Okay, thank you, Ramon, and thank everyone for joining us this evening. The story of Lake Erie isn't just about phosphorus and poop, although that's a major part of it. I'll get back to that in a second, but more importantly, it's about something that has gotten away from us. It's about who runs things in a democracy. And I'm using this abbreviated abbreviated table of organization for the city to show us basically what the Ohio Constitution says. It says that all political authority flows from the people, the citizens. And when I was first on city council, the clerk of council, Larry Brewer, handed all the new council people a table of organizations of the city. And it was bigger than this because it had all the departments, but it looked just like this in prioritizing where the political authority came from. So that's something I wanted to remind us about, and to keep that in mind while I'm going through the poop and the phosphorus portion. So if you could, Alexis, you can take that one down. Yeah, thanks. You've heard a little bit about confined animal feeding operations, or CAFOs. Our group, Advocates for Clean Lake Erie, likes to refer to them as animal feeding factories because they bear no relationship to a farm whatsoever. They're industrial operations. And the word farm is used more as a cover than as an accurate description. So our group thinks that these animal feeding factories are the largest single reason for the flood of what's called excess nutrients going into Western Lake Erie. We think that of all of the problems out there, this is the biggest single one, are all these animal feeding factories. And the thing is with this industry, it's just plain out of control. To talk about trying to fix the regulation, any one of a number of things that get talked about, the H2 Ohio program that's supposed to pay farmers for doing conservation practices, which are supposed to help. This industry is out of control. And if we are going to try to somehow fix it so that we can fix Lake Erie, we're talking about an unlimited amount of money and an unlimited amount of time, and it's just not going to happen. This industry is basically out of control and unsustainable, and has really no business existing when we're talking about trying to save a Great Lake. And let me try to explain briefly why that is. One important thing is it's not always been with us. It wasn't until the mid-90s that we saw any of these industrial feeding facilities start popping up in our watershed. Maria Check showed you the size of the watershed, and it's big. It goes back to Fort Wayne. But it wasn't until the mid-90s that we started having these things in our watershed. Now, however, we've got over 800 of these facilities, and we don't know the exact number because the regulations are so loose. They don't even count all of them. But as best we can determine, we've got over 800 of them. These 800 facilities have within them over 25 million confined animals. Maria mentioned at one point, she said, we've got chickens by the thousands. Well, we've got chickens in each one of these facilities that hold poultry. We have chickens by the millions. And it goes on and on. So over 25 million animals. Now, Advocates for Clean Lake Erie is always trying to get the point across that this is a huge problem and we need to address it. And we try to find ways that we can do that aren't always the same. So we spent a few months late last year looking at the data to try to give another example of how big an impact these animal feeding factories have on Lake Erie. And we totaled up the number of facilities, over 800. We totaled up the number of animals, over 25 million. And then we went to the Department of Agriculture statistics for how much phosphorus different kinds of animals excrete. And we found out that the 25 million animals in these 800 plus facilities excrete as much phosphorus as all the people in the states of Ohio, Indiana, Delaware, Vermont, North and South Dakota. So the entire population of these 6 states essentially is taking a dump in Western Lake Erie, because what happens is that this manure is in liquid form, it's poured onto the fields, and it's not even so much a question of how much of it runs off the top as it goes into the tile and right into the ditches. None of it is treated. And if you could imagine, if our city officials are still with us, if you could imagine a city, no matter what size, the city of Toledo or the city of AI out in Fulton County, if the mayor of those cities said to the EPA, we can't afford to treat this sewage anymore, we're just going to dump it on the land, that wouldn't work very well, and the federal marshals would be knocking at your door real soon. But because of the way the laws are written, these feeding factories get a pass on having to treat their waste like a city would. So this stuff is untreated. It goes right into the streams that flow into the lake. So what's important to discuss about this? We can look at this a lot of different ways. I'd like to, for a moment though, get back to the democracy idea. I think that's, of all the things that we can discuss, agricultural practices or legislation or whatever, I think the single most important thing we can look at this issue through is the issue of democracy, and to ask us a couple of questions about that. How do we think about ourselves? All right, think about that for just a minute. Are we just taxpayers? Are we just consumers, people that go out and buy their food or pay for their water bills? Are we just voters that get a chance to vote every few years, mark a ballot, and then go home and hope that our interests are protected? Or if we can go back, Alexis, to that slide with the table of organization again. If we can go back to that, or are we the source of all political authority? And this might seem like a simple concept because we're told, at least briefly in civics courses, that that's how things are supposed to work, but when it comes right down to it, that's not what happens. We should, however, be able to put ourselves in the frame of mind that we are where all political authority comes from and start doing our organizing maybe a little differently. So I want to hit on that again, because how we think of ourselves as we do this work is really important. So getting back to the questions that you had there before, Alexis, and I'm sorry to have you jumping all over, but who decided, how did we get to this point with something as important as our water? Who's responsible? These are basic questions that people who, from which all political authority flows, these are the kind of questions that we should be asking. Who is responsible for this? Who decided that our food, our meat and our milk and our eggs were going to come from these horrific industrial factories instead of regular farms? Who decided that? You know, how did that happen? Did we vote? At some point were we asked, do you want to have this model for food production from now on? I don't remember. And also, who pays? Who pays for this? Both in our water bills, in our health, and in every way down the line. What programs are being funded with our public money? And do these programs really address our needs? Or is it millions of dollars given to pay for farm practices that we're told, will help fix Lake Erie when we've seen for years and years and years that these practices don't. You know, our mayor said a couple of years ago, and many of us cheered when we heard this, that the Ohio legislature is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Ohio Farm Bureau, and it just about describes it. So when you want to know where all political authority comes from in Ohio when it comes to issues like nature and Lake Erie, unfortunately, that's the correct answer. So what do we do about this? One of the things that we need to do is tell a lot more people. You know, this story needs to get out. People can sign up on the Advocates for Clean Lake Erie or Toledoans for Safe Water mailing list so we can keep in touch. And when we do more of these programs, you'll know. We can think seriously about how do we do more of the activities that the Toledoans for Safe Water did with the Lake Erie Bill of Rights. You know, that one has run into problem in the courts, but are there other ways of thinking along those lines so that we can think of things to do that follow in that tradition? We can put our heads together and come up with some tactics. For example, and this is just one out of many, it would be great to have us design and fund a PR campaign to bring this message to the public. We ought to be seeing these things on billboards. You know, who's responsible? I can see a billboard right now that has the pea soup picture and just 2 words, who's responsible, and have that up there for a while, and then slowly develop the message about who is responsible and what's going on. The urban area here, the city of Toledo, really needs to get on its heels and fight this thing, because assuming we're ever going to get any action to really clean up Lake Erie, it's going to be the powerful interests that have been ruining the lake are going to be opposed to the interests of the people who have been paying the price. And if we sit by and let those decisions get made by the polluters, we're going to just get more of the same that we've had. So we need to tell more people about this. We need to educate and mobilize people and come up with creative ways to do that. Thank you.
Woo, Mike, right on. Damn, that's yeah, that just really puts a face on the problem, and really appreciate you drilling down like that, because I think too often we mask you know, the problem, and oftentimes we mask, you know, the power of the people, you know, like that chart where you had the citizens, and it should be nothing about us without us, and you know, so it really sends a powerful message, you know, that, you know, we know you know, where the sources of these contributing factors are coming from, and so, and we know how to mobilize, and we just need to be more strategic, as you were talking about earlier. I think 2021 is going to be our pivotal year to realign and you know, and move things forward, like you had mentioned. So thank you very much for that. Very powerful stuff. And just so that you know, this isn't going to be the only opportunity or webinar. We're gonna move it forward. We're gonna do some landmarks, checks. You know, we're looking at a big event in July to do a marking, and that's going to be right where the algal blooms are blooming up. So there'll be another opportunity there. It'll be an outdoor event, and so we're looking forward to similar to something that you did at the International Park. So thank you very much for your insight and your words of encouragement to keep going and organize. Next, I'd like to, but not least, I'd like to bring in Christy Meyer. She is with Freshwater Future, and she is going to be presenting us with what legislation is supporting our work. And then afterwards, we will do a question and answer. So Christy, what legislation is supporting our work? You tell us, sister.
Thanks, Ramon, and thanks for having me tonight here with all of you. I'm very honored to be here. This is, so you've heard of speed dating. This is kind of going to be kind of like speed dating with legislation. This won't cover all of the pieces of legislation by any means, but we'll try to hit some high points on the federal, state, and local level. And so let's get started because we have a lot to talk about.
Right on.
So I just want to let you know that I've put your congressional members on this slide and their contact information. Two big pieces of legislation are the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act, which were passed into law to protect our sources of drinking water. The rivers, lakes, and streams is the Clean Water Act, and the quality of the water that flows out of our taps is the Safe Drinking Water Act. Together, they've done a remarkable job, and yet they fail in many places. The Clean Water Act regulates how much pollution can be discharged directly into our rivers, lakes, and streams, as well as how much polluted rainwater can flow into these federal protected water bodies. But it also sets water quality standards to support the water body to meet the fishable, swimmable, and drinkable intent of the Clean Water Act, as you heard Sister talk about earlier. It does not, however, regulate agriculture, which we've been talking a lot about agricultural pollution. The Safe Drinking Water Act regulates how much man-made or naturally occurring pollutants are allowed in our drinking water. The standards created under this act are supposed to be based on health standards, health-based standards. But as we've seen with the lead and copper rule, sometimes that fails. The lead and copper rule allows up to 15 parts per billion in drinking water, but according to the American Pediatric Association and the American Medical Association, there's no safe level of lead. Even more, action's not triggered to lower this amount unless 10% of houses sampled come back with 15 parts per billion or higher in water. So that's 10% of the houses sampled, for instance, in the city of Toledo. Not saying that the city of Toledo has a lead problem in their drinking water right now, but just as an example. The previous administration rolled out a revision to the lead and copper rule, but thankfully President Biden signed an executive order to freeze the revised rule and assigned this executive order to freeze a lot of rules as well, actually, one of them being the waters of the US. And the reason why I mentioned this piece of legislation or this rule under the Clean Water Act is because the waters of the US regulates which water bodies, rivers, lakes, streams, wetlands are protected federally. And the Trump administration rolled that back dramatically. And as a result, this could mean that a lot more destruction of wetlands and smaller streams. Wetlands absorb floodwaters and cleanse them of pollutants before releasing them back into groundwater or into the surface water. And those smaller streams that feed rivers like the Maumee River, as a result of this destruction, it could reach, the pollution could reach, the agricultural pollution upstream could reach Lake Erie quicker, and it could increase the amount that reaches Lake Erie. So, there are two pieces under the Clean Water Act and the Drinking Water Act. There is something called the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Funds. And these funds or these programs provide flexible loans for water infrastructure projects, which could be upgrades to the treatment facilities to protect them from toxic algae, or it could be used to remove lead service lines that distribute water throughout the city into your home. If a city takes a loan, whether a low or no interest loan, most of the time water rates increase to pay back the loan. Some of the funding can also be given out as grants to communities for things like replacing lead service lines or upgrades to treatment trains to protect you from that toxic algae. But unfortunately, these programs are woefully underfunded. And during the late 70s, investments topped out, the federal investments topped out around 63% of the total spending. And in 2014, it dropped down to 9%. In Ohio, we have a $27 billion need over the next 20 years to upgrade all of our water infrastructure. So as you can see, the Clean and Drinking Water State Revolving Loan Funds could be used here and then some, because right now what was passed in for fiscal year 2021 was roughly 2.5 billion for both of those combined. So emergency water is a human right. This was reintroduced on January 28th by two congressional women from Michigan, Rashida Tlaib and Debbie Dingell. And the legislation, if passed, would place a moratorium on shutting off water due to non-payment, restore residential water services, and create a water emergency assistance program to support Americans to pay their water bills during COVID. This just applies to the public utilities receiving federal funds. And just as an FYI, Representative Marcy Kaptur did support this bill. So if you see her, thank her. The Water Act will be reintroduced here shortly by Representatives Brenda Lawrence from Michigan and Ro Kahan from California, with a companion bill that will be in the Senate, Bernie Sanders. And this bill would do a bunch of stuff. But remember, I told you $2.5 billion for the state revolving loan funds. This would allocate $35 billion for the Clean and Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. So substantial increase. It would prioritize disadvantaged communities by providing grants, which is fantastic. And it provides other support, creates 1 million jobs in local communities, and helps household owners replace their private lead service line. So in the end of December, Congress passed fiscal year 2021 consolidated appropriations. The important piece in this piece of legislation, amongst many things, but is they passed $638 million to assist Americans with paying their water bills. And it sounds like the funding will be given to the states in block grants, and from there the state will likely move this funding just like they do for heating assistance. So it most likely might go through pathways for Toledo. The states don't know how much they're receiving yet, and it's probably not going to be enough money because $638 million over 50 states, and then I think a 5% set aside for tribal communities, which are really suffering right now. So stay tuned, but we do have a lot of requests in to be tied to this funding, including a moratorium of at least 180 days if a public utility should receive this funding, or if a resident should receive this funding, that they also have at least 180 days of a moratorium. In your case though, in Toledo, this doesn't really matter because there is a moratorium until the water affordability program is in place. So I have 1 minute. Okay, moving along. H2 Ohio, we heard a little bit about. This is basically Governor DeWine developed a program to protect and funding program to protect and restore our waterways. There is 100 million. He did request 242 million these next 2 fiscal years, fiscal year 2021 and 2022, 100 million for farmers to put best management practices on farm fields, as we heard Mike talk about the success of that. 50 million wetland restoration, I should say, I meant that tongue in cheek, Mike. 92 million for lead service line replacements and septic tanks. So that's a substantial increase from what they got in the past budget for the Ohio EPA to replace lead service lines. And I will note that there's no oversight to these funds, in that for the ag portion of the funding, there's no requirement to show that you are improving water quality. And so that's a real, I would say that needs to be fixed. So Senate Bill 1, I'll just note that it's basically a piece of legislation that was passed to prevent the spreading of manure and fertilizer on frozen and snow-covered ground. And if there's going to be a rain event in the next 12-hour period, there's a lot of loopholes in this too. House Bill 7, which was recently just passed, it creates a statewide watershed planning and management program under the Department of Agriculture. I'm very concerned about this because it basically is saying to the Department of Agriculture, how should we restore our watersheds because they're being polluted by nutrient pollution or agricultural pollution? This is really a job for the EPA. 2 bills that are going to be reintroduced at the state level is this time. Okay, sorry. At the state level is the Water for All bill that will be reintroduced by Representative Erica Crowley. She's a Democrat from Upper Arlington. And basically what the Water for All bill does is it bans water shutoffs due to non-payment and restores residential water services. It would require public utilities to create a program that bases water rates on available income, requires public utilities to create an emergency assistance program, and creates a water bill debt forgiveness program. And then there's the lead service line replacement bill. Basically, what that would do is it would require all lead service lines be replaced within 20 years. It bans partial lead service line replacement so that it would require both the public, what the city owns, and the private, which you own if you should own one, replaced, and provides grants to low-income residents to be able to replace their service line. And then at the local level, I think Alexis talked a lot about this. I will just note here that one of the things that wasn't mentioned was this tenant ordinance. And basically what this does is provide protections to renters so that landlords that maybe aren't paying their water bill, the tenant can call in and work out a payment plan with the water utility. And then I would just note that, as Alexis said, there's the water affordability study, and I know the consultant is reaching out to start conversations with, wants to reach out to start conversations with community members. So please get involved, because the success of this program and supporting people that really need it depends on your voice. And I will leave it there.
Wow. That's a lot of, and there's more. I know that for all of the panelists, you know, to try to squeeze in, you know, going back to the 90s and maybe even prior to that, to squeeze it all in an hour and a half is sometimes feels like an impossible task, but you did an excellent job. And the good thing is that this is recorded, so we can go back, you can go back and listen to it again and again. And so there is that opportunity. And, you know, it's just, you know, it's just nice to know that we have folks that who just finished, who part of this panel, who are still very much engaged from the grassroots level to the state and federal level, who are very aware of the problems and the needs, and are doing everything they can pretty much every day and every night to make sure that our, you know, voices are being heard, and that the appropriate legislation is being heard. And, you know, we'll get to, you know, the point where we can have, you know, in the next couple of years, where we can actually say that now you can go and you know, to Lake Erie and utilize it anytime you want without having a big sign saying, you know, you can't enter it, or that we don't have to pay these exorbitant amounts of money to treat the water before we can drink it, and just on and on. But thank you very much for being with us. This is not going to be the end. We are going to do some additional webinars, because we're going to follow this throughout this year, and we're going to be doing checks and balances on where we're making progress and where we are still struggling, so that we can make sure that we are putting the right kinds of resources, support, and organizing around those areas, so that we can make sure that we are making progress this year. And so I'm really looking forward to that. At this point, I do want to open it up for questions and answers, and there might be polling questions. And I don't, Alexis, is that where you come in?
Yeah, I can facilitate the question Q&A. We actually have a question in the question box now from Douglas Darrow. He says, get the representatives to do their job. It must be fess up about the debt that has created stupid policies. Can we expose this truth, get at the big investment profits, and take the money back to repair this social problem? So I'm not sure who wants to take that on, but essentially the question is, how do we expose the investment profits and take back the money to repair our social problem?
All right. Right now I'm looking at Mike, Marky, and then Christy, and then down the line to Maria. Mike, you want to take a chunk?
Well, that's what we're trying to do in a way. I mean, Douglas asks a question that really hits on the entire political system. So, you know, what we're trying to do here is restore some balance in that system, so that the things that people need and want get considered ahead of what's going to make the most money. And I know that's a very broad answer to his question, but the things that he's asking to get done are all part of what we need to address in order to start having laws and a life that we deserve.
Right on, Mike. Anybody else want to respond to that?
I might just add, one of the things that I would suggest doing too is following the money. Like, who is biggest contributors to your to the legislators, and how much are they contributing? And then and kind of look at that and then start to expose that as well. So if it's the Ohio Farm Bureau, sometimes they go down to the State House and they'll say, you will be, we will let our members know how you voted on this. And so, they use these tactics, and they also give money out to legislators as well. So just be mindful of who's paying and where the money's coming from.
Wow. Sounds like we just left that these past 4 years, but it's still happening, huh?
Always,
Marky, what's that, Mike?
always.
Always, siempre, always. Yeah, it's just, I was visualizing when you were saying follow the money. It was like I was just thinking about, Mike, when you said the big poster billboard, put a face on it, put a face on them. Put them right out there in front so everybody can see who are the ones that are contributing to creating this big mess. And also I want to invite the gentleman who asked the question, I hope he's still on, that, we need you to be part of this effort, particularly this year, if you haven't been already. If you have been, thank you very much. But we need you to be connected to us so directly, so that you can help us move these efforts forward, these initiatives, these organizing actions that we're going to be doing. So you need to be a part of that. And I see there's like 35 other people on here. So, we need you all to be part of this as well. I don't know what else you're involved in, but, these back in 2014, when there was no water, and I think Marky was alluding to that also, on the third day, there was this big panic that I could feel that was really rumbling. And I think people really realized that water is life. And if you don't have this water, I couldn't imagine if we would have gone on several more days, panel, and what kind of, pandemonium, what kind of chaos that would have, that was going to create, because I went as far as almost Indiana to try to find water. And I barely found any water that far out to bring back to Toledo, because we couldn't drink the water because it went so quick. And so it was like, people were saying, what caused this? Why, how did we get here? And so to me, it's like that can still happen anytime now, particularly in the summer months.
Yeah.
And so it's still very real. That hasn't gone away. It's just getting treatment coded right now, it's just all this treatment that goes into the water that we pay for, extra treatment that we pay for when the algal bloom starts to set up, and even currently. And so, so.
We have more questions in the chat box.
Yes, let's get to the question.
So another question. What is being done to prevent another water shutoff like what happened at Creekside Mobile Home Park on City Park Avenue last week? And that question came from Sean Nestor.
Good question.
That an aging infrastructure problem that the park grew in population. More and more units were added, and the pipes, the infrastructure of the place just couldn't handle the load. Was it a water main break or some kind of some kind of pipe break? Now that is a low income community, and how fast does public utilities move to get that repaired so that people can have water?
Anybody want to comment on that?
I would also just add to that, part of what Freshwater Future really encourages the community to advocate for and the city to provide is engagement along the lines of, offering not just assistance but support during those times when water is shut off. Ensuring that people have access to water. It makes no sense if it is an infrastructure problem for people to be without their water and still have to go and, use buckets of water or go pay for water themselves. This should be something that, we should be seeing the support from our city in helping those communities. And I would say, Sean Nestor, to any of the community members that were impacted by that, those are the very people we would like to talk to and have involved with the Toledo Water Council, because these are questions that need to be directly asked to the city.
Thank you, Alexis. And
Ramon,
I would, yeah,
if we could, let's ask that question to our city officials and get that information on our websites. Toledo Toledoans for Safe Drinking Water and the Advocates for Clean Lake Erie, as well as Junction, can put that answer on our websites, I believe.
yes, yes. And I was just going to add on top of that, if it's a question of not being able to make the payment to turn the water on, then nobody should be having their waters turned off because of that. It's not, it doesn't sound like it is the problem of the folks who are living in those trailer mobile homes, that is their fault. So their water should be turned on and left on. And if it's about money, then the payment should be worked out somehow with the owner of that trailer park. So that would be one of the things that I will be asking and pushing for as part of this Water Affordability and Consumer Protection Committee, is that they should not be without water if it's an issue about a water payment not being made. That should never happen
Ramon,
because of the COVID time.
Christy?
I was just going to say, I'm wondering if that tenant ordinance would apply in this case as well for the mobile park residents. And then also just remind everybody that in Toledo, if you're being serviced by Toledo Department of Public Utilities, that there is still a moratorium on water shutoffs. And even though the state has lifted the moratorium, and kudos to Toledo for doing this, and they actually said they don't intend to turn the water off until, and I'm hoping that means that this won't ever happen again. There's a water affordability program in place that addresses affordable water rates, with Roger Colton, the study that he's doing, that he's hoping to talk to community members and get a better understanding of what people are really suffering from, so we can address the affordable water rates, the debt forgiveness programs, and also emergency assistance. So I think what I'm hoping this means, and what we've heard from Toledo, is that they understand that that turning water off or turning water back on during COVID is a public health issue, and that turning water off after COVID is creates a public health issue, and so that it won't happen again. Just important to note those particular things.
Thank you. Any other questions that are on there,
Yep.
Alexis or Alicia?
Nope. We've got a quick question, probably
Good.
to Mike. How much does a typical billboard cost? That question comes from Cecilia Johnson.
Mike, do you know?
Well, I answered that one to everybody. At least I wanted it to go to everybody. The rates really vary. And really what we're talking about is getting a group of people together to look at designing a message and checking out the rates and doing all that stuff. So how much an individual billboard costs it's all over the map. So.
Okay.
Let's get friends in Toledo who can put pressure on the billboard company to do it as a public service announcement.
Sometimes they will.
Everybody drinks the water. Okay, they drink the water, we drink the water.
Yeah.
So if you're a drinker of the water, you're obliged.
Gotcha. And the person who asked that question, thank you very much. And we want you to join us, stay connected with us, because we want you to help us to create the funding so that if it's, if that's what we're going to do, raise funds, that we raise the funds, that you help be a part of that, because you're exactly right. We need to know the price and how to do that. And we're looking forward to having you stay connected with us to make that happen. Thank you.
So we had a comment from, well, I'll first say that Miss Lynn, Mama Lynn mentioned that it's her understanding that the repairs have been made, but not restored because of a $10,000 bill due to COVID-19. Wasn't everyone supposed to be restored? And I saw Alicia and Christy chime in and say yes, they should be restored. And Christy even took it a step further and said, if the water was turned off due to a leak or another not payment issue, that is a different story. Any other comments to kind of round out that?
I'll just add, like, if there is an issue there, the city should certainly work with the resident or residents to determine what is happening there and work quickly and expeditedly to fix the issue.
Right.
Then one final comment, I think from Sean. I heard at some point that Toledo's Department of Public Utilities planned to implement a policy that would allow a minimum daily water use user rate in accordance with the international human rights standards in cases of non-payment. I'd be interested in an update from the city on where they are with this policy and if they are still planning to implement it.
Beatrice is on. We can ask Beatrice and update everyone and work with Marky and Mike to make sure everyone gets the information.
And I will make sure that all of these comments and questions from the chat box, I will save them so that we have them to refer back to and get answers to everyone who's asked questions.
Good. Is everyone that's on right now, Alexis, these 54 people, do we have a way of staying connected with them?
Yes. We
Okay.
should pull a registrant and participant list afterwards.
Okay.
Yep.
I just want to say that we're going to be following up with them, with you, and hopefully you'll be on board with us so we can move this forward, all of these issues and questions. So really appreciate it, and become part of this process with us. So we are at 7:33. We do have a little extended time if we need. If there are any other questions or comments, Alexis, coming up?
Not that I can see. I think we've pretty much answered all of them. If not, people have answered them directly in the Q&A box.
Oh, okay. All right.
A long-term thing that folks could do if they have access to, to young people, engage in the high school curriculum where political science is taught. Ask your young people, what are they learning in political science? And possibly put pressure on our school system to use these real life problems that we have, like the water issue, as a political science, a political action problem, to get involved, and this is a way to get young people involved as well. And also to find out what is being taught. How is it being taught? Are folks learning the Constitution? We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. And what have we sacrificed? What have we given away that really limits we, the people?
Gotcha. Excellent. Thank you. We're towards the end here. Any closing comments from the panelists?
Just one thing. I noticed that Sean Nestor's hand is still raised. Sean, did we answer your question or did you have another one? Oh, he just lowered it. So,
Okay.
Final comments?
Just get involved, please. really depends on all of our voices. Collectively, we're stronger, and we're fighting a lot of money. So please just get involved.
Anybody else? All right, we'll be back. Put that down on your calendar. We'll be back. We're all set. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And we'll have the panelists back because we're going to do updates. We're going to mark these accomplishments and achievements.
Good night, everyone.
The ones that aren't helping.
Good night.